Hello, welcome to the air traffic control presentation for this course. My name is Gary Hebsacker. I'm a retired FAA air traffic employee. I spent over 40 years in air traffic, 9 with the United States Army as a tower and approach controller, and the last 31 years at the Fort Worth Air Route Traffic Control Center. I finished up my career in the Quality Control Office, where we investigated pilot deviations, aircraft accidents, incidents, and air traffic incidents that could happen in the system for a safety impact. The first is, I've got to get my disclaimer in. I do not speak for the FAA since I'm retired, so what you're getting today is my opinion and my experience from having 40 years. I'm also a professional pilot. I've been flying since 1974, and I hold an FAA air transport pilot certificate. And my current job is I teach business pilots to fly jets in simulators at the CAE Center on the DFW airport. I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, about the FAA website. The FAA has an excellent website for UASs. It's www.faa.gov/UAS. Most of the information's there that you need to know, so I'm not going to cover that. What I want to talk about today is how you interact with air traffic control when you're operating a drone. And I'm not going to cover all the regulations because you're going to cover those in the class, but for the most part, air traffic control is not going to be overly interested in what you're doing as long as you're below 400 feet and you're not interfering with their operations. A couple of places where you could be interfering with their operations would be in either Class D or E airspace. Now, there is a couple differences between those. Class D airspace means there's an air traffic tower operating there. And it could be a military tower, it could be an FAA contract, it could be a private tower, we have some of those, or it could be an actual FAA tower. But integrating with them is pretty much the same, no matter what type of tower you're dealing with. One thing you can do if you know you're going to be operating the drone, let's say we're here in Fort Worth today, and Fort Worth has 4 airports that have towers. So what I have suggested in the past when I've talked to groups before is that you try to develop a letter of agreement with the air traffic control towers that you're going to be interfacing with. Whether they want to do a letter of agreement or not is up to the air traffic chief of that facility, but it'll facilitate you operating in their airspace if you ever need to. Now, obviously, you're operating at 400 feet or below. Normally, airplanes are not going to be that low unless they're very close to the airport, basically within 1.5 miles and landing. The FARs require pilots to maintain even 500 feet above ground and obstacles over sparsely populated terrain and 1,000 overpopulated. So the chances of you encountering an airplane are very small. Another thing you might want to consider when you're operating your drone in a police or rescue type situation is calling the nearest air traffic control center and having them issue a temporary flight restriction banning flight in that area. That will keep the area free of other aircraft so you can conduct your operations. We do that quite a lot here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, especially with the Dallas and Fort Worth Police Department. Since they do have helicopter air assets, they will call us, and that basically keeps all the news media helicopters out of their way so they can conduct their operations. Now, Class E airspace is a little bit tricky sometimes. Class E airspace is airspace around what's called an uncontrolled airport. So there's no air traffic control tower there. However, the Class E airspace is designed to provide a safe environment for airplanes that are flying instrument flight rules who are making IFR approaches to those airports. In Class G, or uncontrolled airspace, pilots can fly with 1 mile visibility and just remaining clear of the clouds. However, in Class E airspace, they must have 3 miles visibility, 500 feet below, 1,000 above, and 2,000 feet horizontally from clouds. This allows other airplanes to acquire them on a see and be seen basis. So that's why the Class E airspace exists. Most Class E airspace is going to be controlled by one of 2 agencies, either an air traffic control center or an approach control. So if you're in a fairly decent sized city such as Abilene or Augusta, Georgia, where there's an approach control, you're probably going to be dealing with the approach control for that airport. If it's a more remote or rural area that has an airport with an instrument approach, you're probably going to be dealing with the air traffic control center. You can also make a letter of agreement with them if you decide to. That's usually the best way to do it. And I'm sure you've seen on the FAA website that if you want to operate out of the constraints of the rules, that you can go ahead and get a waiver, and there's ways to get waivers on that. But the letter of agreement will help you put together specific operating criteria so that you can work with that tower, so you can just maybe give them a call. Now, as far as these uncontrolled airports, many of them have what's called a UNICOM service. It's usually run by the airport manager or by the fixed base operator. A fixed base operator on an airport is basically where pilots buy their fuel and their charts and things like that. They have an advisory frequency for pilots that are landing at those airports where the pilot can call in and get what's called an airport advisory, such as what the winds are, the altimeter setting, and the runway in use. This is not an air traffic control facility and does not provide air traffic control separation or instructions. But if you are going to operate your drone in the Class E airspace, it might be helpful to touch base with whoever's running the UNICOM there so that they can warn any airplanes that come into the area. As far as the temporary flight restriction, when you issue one of those, one thing you need to remember is that there may be a pilot who's already airborne when you issue the TFR and does not have the TFR. So somebody could violate a TFR that you put in place simply because they did not know it was there. They're operating VFR, they're not in contact with air traffic control, and they don't know the TFR has been issued. So you may run into some of those situations. So if the UNICOM operator is aware of that. Also, if you can monitor the air traffic frequency in that area or the UNICOM frequency. If you have an aviation handheld radio, it comes in handy. Another thing I'd like to talk about is how do you find out who the controlling agency is for the airport? One of the websites I like to use is airnav.com, AIRNAV.com. You can type in the three-letter identifier if you know it, or just type out the name of the airport, such as if you were in Alabama, the Dothan Regional Airport, and it'll give you the name of the controlling agency that controls that airport, what flight service station controls the airport, and also has phone numbers for airport management that can come in really handy if you need to get a hold of those people. Any air traffic control, FAA air traffic control facility employee has a complete listing on their website for FAA employees of all the phone numbers and stuff. So if you want to do a letter of agreement with an air traffic control facility, the nearest one can put you in touch with the correct people where you can do that, and that'll help you out a whole lot. Most air traffic control facilities will allow you, so if you have two cities that are close together that are going to interact with the same air traffic control facility, you can go in there together and come up with one letter that covers everything for both of you, that rather than having separate letters. And that way there would be more continuity with the operation in case you ever had to operate together. Well, if you're ever going to be outside Class G airspace, basically in Class E or D, you have to coordinate with the air traffic control facility, and that's where the letter of agreement comes in handy. They can, if they want to, and it's totally up to the air traffic manager of this facility, they can give you blanket ability to operate with maybe wherever you want, or just by giving them a phone call rather than having to go through a big pre-briefing type thing. One example of that is at Fort Worth Center, we had several letters of agreement with skydiving schools. Now, the rules require a skydiving school to contact us an hour before takeoff so that we can arrange their activities. Obviously, skydiving, you don't want other airplanes flying through a skydiving area. But with the letter of agreement, we allowed the airplanes to take off and call us once they were airborne to coordinate their skydiving activities. So that saved them a lot of time. Rather, they didn't have to call us an hour in advance. They just called us off the ground because we had a letter of agreement. We knew exactly what they were going to do. So less coordination was required. So that can save you a lot of time. It probably wouldn't, and it depends on the database that the drone has, and there's always a chance of a malfunction or the positioning being off. So, and I would imagine that drones that are operated by police organizations may not have that software because they may need to operate in those areas at time, and they may have permission from the air traffic control facility to do so. So you wouldn't want it to not be able to do that. And another thing I just thought of that I would like to cover. One of the requirements is that you avoid other airplanes. As a professional pilot myself, let me tell you how very difficult it is to see another airplane, let alone a drone. And from what I've seen, most of them are white or black. They're very difficult to see. It's even difficult for pilots to see other like full-sized airplanes, even like Cessnas, 4-passenger airplanes against certain backgrounds, such as if the airplane's white, if you're looking up at it against a gray sky. So it's very important when you're operating a drone that you do avoid airplanes because the chances of them seeing you are very, very small. Okay, how quick can a tower, I mean, if you have the letter of agreement, you're going to have a phone number where you can get a hold of them 24/7. So with most of them, it should just be a matter of giving them a phone call and telling them what you want to do so that they know what's going on and they can keep airplanes away from that area is normally the best way to handle that. Well, the chances of you having to operate in the airspace where you're required to have permission is probably pretty small. I'm not saying it's non-existent. It can happen, but obviously you have to use a little bit of common sense. If a life's at stake, my opinion is, as an air traffic controller, the air traffic control facility is not going to give you a hard time when they realize, okay, this was a bona fide emergency. We had to act now and coordinate with you later. And of course it's on you to miss the other airplane. So as long as you're doing that, I really don't think an air traffic control facility is going to have a big problem with that. Thank you very much. I hope this helps, and I hope you're enjoying your class.